He was just grabbing burgers with his son. But the moment the billionaire looked over and saw a broke mother shaking at the drive-thru window, everything changed. What he did next shocked the restaurant, and exposed a secret that would rewrite his son's future forever. If you believe kindness still matters in this world, hit subscribe, because stories like this will change the way you see people. The rain had started without warning, the kind of soft but relentless drizzle that blurred the city lights into trembling reflections on the windshield, and Marcus Hale barely noticed it as he pulled his black SUV into the drive-thru line of a modest fast food restaurant on the edge of downtown Chicago, the kind of place most billionaires would never be caught dead visiting, except Marcus wasn't most billionaires, not anymore, not since the divorce, not since life had stripped him down to just two things that mattered. His 10-year-old son Ethan sitting beside him clutching a paper menu like it was a treasure map, and the fragile hope that he was still raising a good human being in a world obsessed with money, power, and appearances. Ethan leaned forward, eyes wide, pointing excitedly at the picture of a cheeseburger, talking about how his mom never let him eat fast food anymore because it's bad for the planet, and Marcus smiled faintly, letting the boy ramble, because moments like this, quiet, ordinary, painfully normal, were the only times he felt like he could breathe. The engine idled as the line crawled forward inch by inch, and Marcus drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his tailored suit jacket folded neatly in the back seat, replaced by a hoodie and jeans that helped him disappear into the crowd, anonymity being the rarest luxury money could buy. Ahead of them, a battered silver sedan rolled to a stop at the ordering speaker, its paint chipped, bumper cracked, exhaust coughing like it was holding on by sheer will alone. Marcus barely glanced at it at first, too busy listening to Ethan debate whether fries or nuggets were the better side, until the car lingered longer than expected, the speaker crackling awkwardly, a pause stretching on just a little too long. Then Marcus noticed the woman in the driver's seat. She couldn't have been older than 30, maybe younger, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled into a messy bun that screamed exhaustion, her shoulders hunched as if she was bracing for something painful. In the back seat, two small faces pressed against the window, children, one barely a toddler, the other maybe 5, their noses smudging the glass as they stared hungrily at the glowing menu board. The woman spoke again into the speaker, her voice faint even through the closed windows, and Marcus saw her grip the steering wheel tighter, knuckles whitening, before she shook her head slowly, defeated. The speaker buzzed once more, and then went silent. The car didn't move. Ethan noticed too. "Dad," he whispered, tugging Marcus's sleeve, "why isn't she driving forward?" Marcus leaned slightly, watching as the woman wiped at her face with the back of her hand, clearly fighting tears, and when she finally pulled up to the payment window, the truth revealed itself in a way no amount of money could soften. The cashier leaned out, speaking gently but firmly, and the woman opened her wallet, revealing nothing but a few crumpled dollar bills and a stack of expired coupons. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. The woman shook her head again, mouthing an apology, glancing back at her kids, shame pouring off her in waves so strong it made Marcus's chest tighten. She closed her eyes for just a second, not long, just long enough to gather the strength to disappoint her children, and then started to pull the car away. "Dad," Ethan said again, this time louder, confused, "she didn't get any food." Marcus felt something crack open inside him. He'd spent his entire adult life building an empire, numbers on screens rising into the billions, praised for ruthless efficiency, feared for his cold negotiations, yet here he was, face to face with a moment where none of that mattered. He rolled down his window. "Hey," he called out, his voice cutting through the rain. The woman froze, half turned, fear flickering across her face, fear of judgment, of humiliation, of another reminder that the world had no mercy for people who fell behind. "Please," Marcus said quickly, softer now, "don't leave." She hesitated, then stopped. Marcus pulled his SUV forward slightly, close enough to see the tears streaking her cheeks. "Let me take care of it," he said, gesturing toward the window. She shook her head immediately. "No, I can't," her voice broke. "It's okay," Marcus interrupted gently. "Really, I want to." The cashier looked between them, unsure, until Marcus handed over his card without another word. The transaction beeped, approved instantly, a sound so simple and final it felt almost cruel in its contrast to the struggle the woman had just endured. When the food came out, bags heavy with burgers, fries, milk cartons, even extra desserts, the woman stared at them like they weren't real. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the steering wheel again, tears flowing freely now. "You have no idea what this means." Marcus nodded. "I think I do." As she drove away, Ethan was quiet, his earlier excitement replaced by something deeper, more thoughtful. "Dad," he said slowly. Are we rich? Marcus glanced at him, surprised. Why do you ask? Ethan looked back toward the road where the woman's car had disappeared. Because, she looked like she needed it more than we did. The words hit Marcus harder than any business loss ever had. He swallowed. We are, he admitted. But that doesn't mean we stop noticing people. Ethan nodded, absorbing that lesson like it was the most important one he'd ever learned. What Marcus couldn't know, was that this small act, this simple moment in a drive-thru line, was about to ripple outward, colliding with secrets from his past, exposing truths about the woman he'd helped, and forcing him to confront a reality that would change both their lives forever. The next morning arrived wrapped in steel-gray clouds, the city waking slowly beneath a damp hush that clung to sidewalks and window panes alike, and Marcus Hale stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass of his penthouse office staring down at Chicago like it was a chessboard he'd once mastered but now barely recognized. His reflection ghosted over the skyline, eyes tired, jaw set, the memory of the drive-thru replaying itself in fragments he couldn't shake. The trembling hands, the children's faces, the way the woman's pride had cracked before his eyes, because it shouldn't have mattered, not to a man whose life was measured in quarterly earnings and hostile takeovers, yet it did, gnawing at him in a way that made spreadsheets feel suddenly hollow. His assistant knocked softly and announced the day's agenda: mergers, meetings, a charity gala that evening he'd already forgotten agreeing to, and Marcus nodded absently, dismissing her with a wave, his thoughts drifting instead to Ethan at school, wondering if the boy was telling his friends about the sad lady at the burger place, or quietly holding on to the lesson like a seed waiting for the right moment to grow. Across town, in a narrow apartment perched above a closed-down laundromat, Lena Carter sat at a small kitchen table littered with overdue bills, the fast food bags from the night before still folded neatly in the trash like artifacts from a miracle she hadn't fully trusted yet. Her kids, Noah and Millie, were laughing over cereal, fries reheated in a pan because they'd insisted the burgers were too special to eat all at once, and Lena watched them with a complicated mix of relief and shame twisting in her chest. She'd told herself she was done relying on strangers, done hoping for kindness in a city that had taken more than it gave, but the man in the SUV, calm, gentle, eyes sharp with something like understanding, had cracked that armor wide open. She didn't know who he was, didn't want to know, only that his son's quiet stare had felt like a mirror reflecting every promise she'd broken to her own children since her husband died and the medical bills swallowed everything whole. Lena had once had a life that looked nothing like this. She'd been a nursing student, top of her class, married young to a man who laughed easily and believed the world would bend if you pushed hard enough. Then came the accident, a delivery truck, a rainy intersection, one phone call that shattered time into before and after that, everything unraveled with cruel efficiency. Scholarships vanished when she took time off to grieve, savings drained into hospital debts, friends faded when grief grew inconvenient, and the city, relentless and expensive, closed in around her until the only thing she could still afford was endurance. She worked nights cleaning offices, days at a diner that barely paid minimum wage, her car held together with duct tape and hope, every decision measured against the simple question of whether her kids would eat. By noon, Lena stood behind the counter of the diner, pouring coffee for a businessman who complained about it being too weak, her mind wandering despite herself back to the drive-thru, to the way the man's voice hadn't carried pity, only certainty. When her shift ended early, cut again because business was slow, she sighed, tying her jacket tighter against the cold as she stepped outside, nearly colliding with a sleek black car idling at the curb. Her heart jumped into her throat when the window rolled down and she saw him. The man from the night before. Marcus Hale. She didn't know his name, but something in her recognized that calm presence instantly, and panic flared hot and sharp. "I'm sorry," she blurted, already stepping back. "I didn't ask for." "You didn't," Marcus said gently, stepping out of the car, hands open in a way that made it clear he wasn't there to corner her. "I hope this doesn't feel strange. I just wanted to check that you and your kids were okay." Lena laughed bitterly. "Okay is a strong word," she said, then stopped herself, cheeks flushing. "I mean, thank you. For last night. You didn't have to do that." Marcus nodded. "I know, but I wanted to." He hesitated, then added, "I grew up watching my mother skip meals so I could eat." "It stays with you." The admission surprised them both. Lena studied him more closely now, noticing the way his clothes were simple but expensive, the way people passing by glanced twice, recognition flickering and then sharpening into whispers. A pair of teenagers across the street stopped and stared openly. "Wait," Lena said slowly. You're him, aren't you?" Marcus followed her gaze, exhaling quietly. "I suppose I am. Marcus Hale," she whispered, the name heavy with news headlines and whispered legends. The billionaire. She stiffened, pride rearing up again. I don't want charity, she said quickly. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. Neither did my mother, he replied. That's why I'm not offering it. He reached into his jacket and handed her a card. I run a foundation that helps single parents with job placement and education. No cameras, no strings, just help. Lena stared at the card like it might burn her fingers. Why me? She asked, voice cracking. Marcus didn't answer right away. Because he didn't fully know himself. Because something about her struggle mirrored his own quiet fear, that despite all his power, he might still fail the one person who mattered most. Because my son was watching, he said finally. And I want him to grow up believing this world can be better than it is. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken histories. Lena swallowed hard. I'll think about it, she said. Marcus nodded. That's all I ask. As he turned to leave, Lena called after him. Mr. Hale. He paused. Thank you, she said, not for the food, not even for the offer, but for seeing her when the rest of the world had looked away. Marcus drove off, unaware that across the street, a woman stood frozen in shock, her manicured hand tightening around her phone as she stared after him with narrowed eyes. His ex-wife, Victoria Hale, who had just witnessed something she could use, something that would drag secrets from the shadows and ignite a chain of events none of them were ready for. By that evening, as Marcus dressed for the gala he dreaded attending, a message flashed on his phone from an unknown number. We need to talk about the woman you helped. You don't know who she really is. Marcus stared at the screen, unease creeping in, unaware that Lena, sitting alone in her dim apartment clutching that foundation card, had just discovered a name in her past she'd prayed never to hear again. Hale, and the realization that the man who'd helped her might be tied to the very system that once destroyed her family. The kindness from a drive-thru line had cracked open doors long sealed shut, and behind them waited truths sharp enough to cut everything they touched. The gala unfolded beneath chandeliers heavy with crystal and expectation, a sea of tailored suits and shimmering gowns swirling through the grand ballroom like a carefully choreographed illusion of generosity, and Marcus Hale moved through it all with the practiced ease of a man who had learned long ago how to smile while bracing for impact. His hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder as cameras flashed and donors praised his foundation, none of them knowing that his mind was elsewhere, locked onto the anonymous message still burning on his phone like a warning flare fired too late to turn back. Ethan, uncomfortable in his small suit, leaned close and whispered that the room smelled like too much perfume and fake happiness, and Marcus almost laughed, because children saw truth with a clarity adults spent fortunes trying to bury. He bent slightly and told his son to stay near the stage, promising he'd be right back, then slipped away toward a quiet corridor just as his phone vibrated again, this time with a name he hadn't seen in months, Victoria. She was waiting near the terrace doors, perfectly composed, every inch the woman who had once ruled boardrooms at his side before bitterness and ambition had torn them apart, and when she turned to face him her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. You really don't know when to stop playing savior, do you? She said softly, glancing toward the ballroom where Ethan stood laughing with a donor's wife. Marcus's jaw tightened. If you have something to say it. Victoria lifted her phone and showed him a photo taken from across the street that morning, him standing beside Lena outside the diner, the angle intimate enough to invite assumptions. Her name is Lena Carter, Victoria said. And she's not just some poor mother you picked out of a drive-thru line. Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his chest. She's the widow of Daniel Carter, Victoria continued, eyes gleaming, the engineer who died after exposing safety violations at one of your subsidiary construction firms. The lawsuit you settled, the one you barely remember. The world seemed to tilt. Marcus remembered now, a report buried under a mountain of acquisitions, a whistleblower labeled unstable, a quiet settlement pushed through by lawyers eager to protect shareholders. That wasn't my decision, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, they rang hollow. Victoria stepped closer. It was your company, she whispered. And now you've handed me the perfect narrative. Billionaire preys on grieving widow under the guise of charity. Imagine the headlines. Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. You wouldn't drag Ethan into this. Victoria's smile faded, just for a moment. I don't intend to, she said. But you will. All you have to do is shut down the foundation, walk away from her, and let me regain control of the board. Otherwise, she gestured vaguely toward the ballroom. Children get hurt by scandals every day. Marcus left her standing there and went to the balcony, the city sprawling below him in glittering indifference, his reflection in the glass fractured into versions of himself he no longer recognized, the builder, the father, the man who had looked away. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was Lena. I just found out who you are, the message read. And who your company was to my husband. I think you deserve to know the truth, and so does your son. Marcus closed his eyes, the weight of years pressing down all at once, and in that moment he understood that there was no path forward that didn't demand sacrifice. He returned to the ballroom and asked for the microphone. The room quieted instantly, donors turning, cameras lifting, Ethan looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Marcus took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. Tonight was supposed to be about generosity, he began, voice steady despite the storm inside him. But generosity without accountability is just performance. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He spoke then of Daniel Carter, of the safety report ignored, of the settlement paid instead of justice, of a system that rewarded silence over truth. Gasps followed. Victoria's face drained of color. I failed, Marcus said plainly. And because of that failure, a family suffered. He gestured to the side of the room where Lena stood frozen, having arrived moments earlier after receiving his message, her hands shaking as every eye turned toward her. This foundation exists not to erase guilt, but to confront it. And I will personally fund an independent investigation into every subsidiary I own, starting tonight. Chaos erupted, reporters shouting, donors whispering, board members storming out, but Marcus only looked at Ethan, who stared back with a mixture of fear and pride. Later, when the room had emptied and the future of his empire hung by a thread, Ethan tugged his sleeve. Did you do the right thing? He asked quietly. Marcus knelt, meeting his son's gaze. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I did the honest thing. Ethan nodded slowly. Mom says honest people sleep better. Marcus smiled sadly. She's right. Weeks later, the fallout was brutal. Stock prices fell. The board ousted him. Victoria vanished from public view under the weight of her own exposure. But something else happened too. The investigation uncovered systemic corruption, reforms followed, lives were saved. Lena finished her nursing degree through the foundation, not as a symbol, but as a professional rebuilding her life. And on a quiet evening months later, Marcus once again sat in a drive-thru line with Ethan, this time in an older car, the city lights softer, the rain familiar. Ahead of them, a tired man fumbled with his wallet. Ethan leaned forward. Dad, he whispered, can we help? Marcus smiled, a real one this time, and nodded, because wealth, he had learned, wasn't what you kept. It was what you were willing to lose so your child could grow up knowing that kindness, even when it costs everything, is still worth the price.